Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello and welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to delving into top-tier insights and strategies employed by established experts in their domains to achieve success, and also who wrote a book about it. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer here at Authors on Mission, and today I am so thrilled to welcome a true Renaissance woman, Kim Gottlieb-Walker. She has a remarkable career that spans over 5 decades, beginning as a photographer, documenting her counterculture moments of the 1960s, capturing iconic images of rock legends, and later working on classic films. Now, Kim has reinvented herself as a novelist with her book, Lenswoman in Love, a story that draws on her extraordinary experiences navigating the world of rock and roll, film, photography, all that during the 60s and 70s. So today we're going to talk about Kim's life from behind the camera to behind the pen, discussing how her visual storytelling background informs her writing and what lessons of her experience can offer to us aspiring authors. Kim, it is a pleasure to have you on Authors on Mission podcast.
It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive in. It's a really amazing story that you have to share here. So I'm looking forward to it. But I do understand, and to our listeners, you're in for a treat. Kim has a slideshow prepared for us about her life and her experiences. So Kim, let's dive right into it.
All right, here we go. I'm living proof that it's never too late to reinvent yourself. So the first thing that I ever shot journalistically was the free speech movement at Berkeley when I was a freshman. And I had my mother's little fixed lens 35 millimeter camera, and the crowd showed up and Joan Baez sang to the crowd. And so that was my first journalistic experience, and that's in my book. It's my heroine Maddie's first journalistic experience as well.
Wow, no, I love that. And these are the original images that you captured yourself.
Oh, yes.
That's incredible. Look at that. You can just sense the energy in the crowd. I could imagine it's a loud day, but it's kind of the sun shining. It's promising too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so while I transferred from Berkeley down to UCLA because I wanted to major in motion picture production. And they had speakers all the time, including Dan Ellsberg, who revealed the Pentagon Papers and helped to end the Vietnam War, and Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black Congresswoman, and this Dr. Spock, and Ray Bradbury. And my film school teacher, Billy, who the character in the book Wild Bill Brannigan is based on, used to do interviews, and he did an interview with Jimi Hendrix before anybody had heard of him in America. And this was during the interview. I didn't realize he was flirting with me. I was very naive. And he invited me backstage at the Shrine, and I photographed him jamming with the other musicians back there.
Wow. Now that's really cool to know that.
And this was when I was working for the Underground Press, and we interviewed Andy Warhol, who literally did not say a single word during the whole interview and had the same straight face that he always has, until one of his companions said something that amused him, and I got the one shot that I wanted. Because you don't usually see Andy Warhol smiling. And Jim Morrison, shooting Jim Morrison and Andy Warhol are both in the book, that my alter ego photographs. And Joni Mitchell at the Isle of Wight, James Taylor and Carole King in London. This was a protest in London because an underground newspaper called Oz had Rupert the Bear doing sexual things, and so they got busted for obscenity, and there were rallies all over London. And then my experiences recording with bands recording inside the studio led to some of the chapters in the book. And so I was with Pink Floyd in the recording studio in '71. I did not write specifically about Pink Floyd in my novel, but I did write about a band called Purple Harry.
Okay, well, that's really cool that you have these images. My goodness. And Pakistan too. Wow.
Yes, and my heroine travels to Pakistan. And so these are all pictures that are mentioned in the book as part of her experience there. And everything that happens in that chapter are things that I really experienced, including trying to smuggle hashish out of Pakistan, which could have ended me in a dungeon for the rest of my life. So the things we do in our youth, it's amazing we survived. And the first media thing that I photographed was the Sha Na Na show. I worked on that for a season, which was really fun. And this was the night that McGovern won the primary in California. And present at that event was Annie Leibovitz, so I grabbed a shot of her. And I photographed Woody Allen, both in interviews and in performances. And I met my husband over the formation of Music World magazine. He was the editor, and I was the photo editor and chief photographer. And we put Tom Waits on the cover, who no one had heard of at that point. I photographed him at his home in Silver Lake. And we photographed Graham Parsons, who's the father of country rock. And the man peeking out from behind his chair is his manager, who burned his body in the desert a few months later after Graham died, which is what Graham said he wanted. And that afternoon, Graham and Emmylou Harris jammed all afternoon. He had just met her and invited her over. And we had gone there with young Cameron Crowe, who you see back here in the background, who's eating something. And this is my husband leaning against the pole here on the side. And there's Graham and Emmylou. And it was an amazing afternoon. Cameron wrote for our music magazine before he wrote for Rolling Stone, so we feel like we discovered him. And I shot a lot of rock and roll. Mark Bolan, Peter Frampton, Jerry Garcia, who appears in the book, when Maddie goes to the celebration of the summer solstice in San Francisco and smokes with Jerry Garcia, and Robert Palmer, David Crosby and Graham Nash. I should mention David Crosby tried to pick me up backstage at the Jimi Hendrix concert.
All these guys be flirting with you.
Oh yeah, there was always lots of flirting. And the Eagles with Linda Ronstadt and Patti Smith. These double exposures are in the camera because I ran out of film, so I wound it back, and the double exposures were just pure luck the way they turned out.
They're really beautiful.
And then I worked with Bob Marley over a 2-year period because my husband became the head of publicity for Island Records in the United States. And it was his job to introduce Bob to the American public. And so we set up interviews with him, and we visited him down in Jamaica. And this is in between interviews. Ziggy has this on his wall.
Wow. No, that's a great shot too, with all the way that the smoke's kind of wrapping around.
And they interviewed my husband and me rather extensively for the movie One Love, the Bob Marley movie, because my husband was actually with him the weekend that he was shot.
Oh my goodness.
And this is in LA, Bob and the band on the way to do the Manhattan Transfer summer replacement show. They had no idea what to make of him. And as they were pulling away from the curb, I said, "We'll see you over there, guys." And they turned around and I got the one shot. And this is, my husband is down here in the corner. He had just introduced George Harrison to Bob. And this is Bob's manager, Don Taylor, who took 5 bullets during the assassination attempt. But this was backstage at the Roxy where there was no light at all. And I had a flash on my camera that was run on batteries that were dying. So I had to wait 30 seconds between photos, which in a 2-minute meeting is forever. And that's my only selfie there. I'm reflected in the mirror.
That's what I was going to say. There you are.
I didn't even realize I was reflected in the mirror. I was too busy looking at Bob. But the photos over that 2-year period resulted in my book, Bob Marley and the Golden Age of Reggae. And this is Bob going on stage to perform and in his home at Hope Road. And this was the High Times cover session. Bob didn't usually like to pose, but for the cover of High Times, he was completely on board. And that's my son, who was almost the time, who Bob got a huge kick out of because he considered himself a Rasta. And he knew all the cuts on the reggae albums that had been released in the United States. And Bob performing in Santa Barbara. It was nice to be able to shoot during the daytime.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that lighting, right?
And Bunny Wailer, one of the original Wailers, who was an Obeah man. He had powers. And someone asked if he could photograph him. And he said, "I don't let dead men take my picture." And so and the guy died within a couple of weeks. So I figured the fact that he allowed me to photograph him meant I was going to be around for a while. And this is Peter Tosh, one of the original Wailers. This picture is what was used on the cover of his album Equal Rights. They repeated the image of his face, and it's the way the public saw him, as the militant one. But this is the way I saw him. He was the gentlest, sweetest guy. He was just a lovely, lovely person. And this is him doing karate on a dock out in Jamaica.
That's amazing shots too. Hopefully you weren't injured in that karate.
No, my husband got to spar with him a little bit on the deck, and someone shot some 8mm footage of it, which was very neat. And Justin Hines of Justin Hines and the Dominoes, I had to wade way out into the water and shoot back toward the shore to get that. And Bob Marley at home, having a spliff. But he was the most disciplined person I think I've ever met.
How so?
Rehearsals, he was a fanatic about rehearsals being, everyone knowing their cues and,
right.
and being on time and doing it right. And This producer, Deborah Hill, who got me into the Cinematographers Guild, I met her working on a film that was so bad it was never even released, but she was the script supervisor on it, and she remembered all the people she had worked with when she then wrote and produced Halloween with John Carpenter. And so that resulted in my book, On Set with John Carpenter. I worked on 5 films for him.
Wow. Okay.
And it was an absolutely wonderful experience. These are just some shots from Halloween. The one on the right is a little hard to tell what it is unless you know that this is after Annie dies in the car and slides down the window, the steamed up window of the car.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So you took that like in the moment of it being shot, just to clarify, or is this?
Well, to tell you the truth, shooting that scene, there was only one angle you could shoot it from, which is through the window of the car, which is where the movie camera was.
Right.
So John made sure when they got it to pull the movie camera out and say, okay, stay there and do it again for Kim. Which is very rare that you find directors who will do that.
Yeah.
It was just a pleasure working
collaboration.
with them. There's Jimi playing with the props. And she was only 19 when we shot Halloween. And this was working on Escape from New York, which was actually the film that got me into the union. And because Deborah Hill fought for me, it took an arbitration. That's me, the picture of me and Kurt, my daughter, replicated that when she produced a film starring his son Wyatt. So she got a picture of her and Wyatt that matches the picture of me and Kurt.
Wow, that's really cool.
And I always taught John Carpenter that he should point whenever nothing was going on, but I was there with my camera because it would give me a picture. And so
nothing's happening in this photo. He's just pointing into space.
Yes. And spontaneously, both he and the director of photography, Dean Cundy, pointed in opposite directions. It's one of my favorite pictures. And that's me with Deborah Hill and John, and that's me playing with the props. I'm not a gun person, but it makes me look like a badass, so I really had fun playing with the props. And Ernest Borgnine, James Cameron, who painted New York, the New York skyline on glass, which they then lined up in front of the camera with the horizon at the Sepulveda Dam in Los Angeles. And they turned the Sepulveda Dam area into Central Park.
No way. Wow. I didn't realize the backstory behind that one.
Yeah. And this was the entire crew for Escape from New York. I prided myself in my crew pictures. And I got a call one night after I got into the union to shoot Cheers, and I shot their crew pictures, and everyone on the Paramount lot was so excited about it. I ended up working on Cheers for 9 years and Family Ties for 5 years.
Wow. It's amazing how one thing can lead to another like that.
And this was from Christine. Keith Gordon, who starred in Christine, became a director, and he learned how to do it by hanging out with John Carpenter on the set and watching what he did. And this is from working on Cheers backstage when John Cleese was the guest star. And that's Jim Burrows, the director, the best director in sitcoms ever. I was kind of the family photographer on Cheers, so whenever anyone had any kind of an event, they would call me. So when Jim Burrows decided at age 60 to have a bar mitzvah, I shot his bar mitzvah photo for him.
Oh, man.
And this is just various photos from working on television, including backstage at Family Ties, and the guys from Cheers when they lost the bar bet and had to shave their heads, and Brandon Tartikoff. This is Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of NBC, visiting the set of Star Trek, because I worked on both Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and Michael J. Fox with Michael J. Pollard. And I shot stills at Comic-Con for almost 20 years because my husband was the one who started bringing celebrity guests from the studios to Comic-Con. So I had great access.
Incredible stories. Coming into this, I did not realize the extent of all of your experiences. This is incredible. So we have Patrick Stewart here.
Yes, Patrick Stewart with Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. And there is my novel, which was inspired by my career.
There it is. And I'm glad that you added that because, everybody listening today, there it is. There is the cover. And I love that. Is that a younger version of you on the screen right there?
Well, I went through 13 different cover versions working with my cover artist, and we finally landed on the one I was happy with.
I love that. And you can see, is that perhaps your husband in the camera lens? Who is that in the reflected back at us right there?
That's the hero of the book.
The hero of the book.
Is based on every man I've ever loved in my life. All of their best qualities. Mostly my husband, because it's got his sense of humor and his music sensibilities. But it definitely reflects all of the different men that I've admired and loved in my life.
I love that. Wow. Well, I'm very, very glad that you have this presentation because it puts everything into perspective for us. And thank you for sharing that as well. We're going to discuss a little bit more, but for anybody who is interested in learning more, we're going to have those links also in the description box of this podcast today too, so you can go ahead and click on them. Kim, this has been amazing. I love that slideshow.
Thank you.
I did research. I was looking into, Lenswoman in Love and all of your experiences, but I think seeing the pictures and hearing you talk about them puts another layer onto everything. So you really have lived a remarkable life. But, please tell me, what was the moment you decided to start putting it on paper?
Well, a lot of people had said, "Oh, you've had such an interesting career. Why don't you write a memoir?" And I really didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted to have more freedom to invent and do a little wish fulfillment and be more creative. So I decided to take my experiences and write a love story instead. And I wrote the first draft of it about 25 years ago, which was a good thing because my memory was pretty sharp back then.
Good.
And then I put it in a drawer and left it there for 10 years. And I then pulled it out to see if it was embarrassing or to see if it was a good read. And there was enough good stuff in it. Yeah, there was enough good stuff that it was worth working on it, because the first draft is never your final draft. The first draft is just getting the story down on paper, but it's not ready for publishing. And so I knew that there was enough good stuff in it that it was worth joining a critique group and going over the book and rewriting it to make it as effective as possible. And with the first rewrite, I had started the way every beginning writer starts, where you're doing it from everybody's point of view, and it's third person, and it's kind of all over.
Yeah.
And so in my second draft, I had little diary entries at the beginning of each chapter that were from my heroine. And the writers in my critique group said, "Oh, those diary entries are so compelling. Why don't you try turning the whole book into first person?" So I did a complete rewrite and put the whole book into first person. So you don't know what's going on in anybody else's mind or what's happening with anyone else. It's all strictly from Maddie's point of view.
Right. I always do recommend that because it's easier to kind of keep track of things consistency wise. Just as a side note, do you have a preference between first person and third person?
Oh, I've really come to love first person.
Yeah.
You can really go deep. So after that, I found an agent, and he didn't have much luck finding me a publisher. And then I found another agent, and he found a publisher who said, I really like this book, but it needs more oomph, without defining what oomph was. And I realized they were absolutely right, that I had written a book thinking of it as a traditional romance. And so I didn't get my heroine together with the hero until about 2/3 of the way through the book. And she had no sexual experience up until then. And for the 1960s and 70s, that was totally unrealistic. So I went back and added all the sex that should have been there in the first place. And so now it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It is what it was really like in the 1960s and 70s. And when I had my daughter read it, she said, I love this book, but there are going to be a lot of people who are upset because Maddie gets her first kiss from Jake when she's 15 and he's 21. That's just not acceptable. And I said, well, you don't understand. It was a different time. I mean, there were innumerable songs written about younger girls, and it was not unusual at all for guys in their 20s to be dating teenagers. So it was a different time and a different sensibility. And sometimes because of the sexual revolution, which on one hand was a boon to women, it gave us freedom. On the other hand, it created a lot of pressure sometimes to go farther than you wanted to. And so many times girls would be pressured into situations that they would regret later. And there was no Me Too movement, so there was no support from the community to say, oh, that shouldn't have happened to you. And so often girls felt guilty about it and felt that it was their fault. And so all of those things were part of the sensibility of the times. So I asked my publisher, do I have to rewrite the whole book to make it acceptable for today's sensibilities? And he said, nope, you just have to put a disclaimer at the beginning, an author's note,
right,
which explains that this was a different time. There were no computers, there were no cell phones, there were body image problems because each generation had its own idea of what beauty was. And in the 60s, Twiggy for a while was the ideal, which meant that you had to be absolutely emaciated. And there's one point where my heroine comes back from Pakistan after having been really sick there, and she weighs like 95 pounds. And the only good thing about it is that she could fit into the fashions at the time. Okay. And my doctor said, oh, no, you can't put that in. That's body shaming. I said, no, you have to understand what the sensibilities of the time were.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I work as a ghostwriter and an editor, and there's a lot of romance books coming out these days, and people are following these regulations, like you have to have one main guy, one main girl, very straightforward, age gap can't really be too big of a thing unless they're older, and all these things. But I like the way that you're breaking that tradition in a way by actually was, and I like that. It's important to show the authentic way things were, and it's more interesting too, and just in general.
I agree, and it gave it a lot more oomph.
Yeah, that oomph, that mysterious oomph that he did not explain to you.
Yes.
To everybody listening, I'm sure we've all experienced that, having an editor, a beta reader, or a publisher say, you need so-and-so thing. You don't even understand what it might mean sometime. So for example, how did you figure out that's what was missing? Did you kind of analyze and look back, or?
Well, I understood pretty quickly that oomph was referring to the sex. But there were other things, too, that I got from my critique group, which are incredibly valuable. One of the people in my critique group said, everything is just too easy for Maddie. She doesn't have enough challenges. And I realized that was true. And so I went back and I added a lot more things that provided challenges for her. The loss of her father, the difficulty in getting jobs, the disaster that happens on the movie set that almost kills Jake. I added a whole bunch of things that give her more challenges, and it made the book better. And it's really important when you work with a critique group or with an editor that you don't take anything personally, and that you seriously look at what you can put in the book, seeds that you can plant that you pay off later, that you have an arc of change that the character experiences. They're all things that are not necessarily in your first draft, because the first draft is just telling the story. The second draft, you go deeper, and you get to put in what the characters' reactions are to the things that they're experiencing. And you get to plant those seeds that you pay off later in the book, which makes it a satisfying experience for the reader.
Right, and it's great to know that you planned for that, but also you did it in a way. You kind of had to go through many different trials and errors and figure out what works best and what doesn't. And first off, it's great that you had that group that offered you such feedback. To anybody listening, that's something we should all probably get involved in. There's a whole level of community that is something we undervalue sometimes as writers. You need to have.
Absolutely. And I was very lucky with my writers group. I found them through the Women's National Book Association, and they were all quite accomplished writers. Some had already written a book or two, so they were very insightful and very encouraging. And it's really important to find a supportive and knowledgeable writers group, critique group, preferably people who are at your level and slightly better, so that they can really pinpoint the things that aren't quite working. And I also, through the Greater Los Angeles Writers Society, I found a wonderful editor whose name is Deanna Brady. And Deanna is a fanatic. She does not let anything slip by that isn't as it should be. And she was wonderful. She taught me so much just in the editing process. For instance, I didn't realize that within a sentence, it should be in the right chronological order. For instance, you don't say, he greeted me after he came through the door, because he came through the door first.
Right, yeah. It's sentence clarity. You need to make sure that, and that's something that everybody should be aware of. You know, it's important to get your ideas out there, but then it's also important to be clear, and because you're going to create confusion that interrupts the flow of the book. So that's an interesting example of that. Was that one of the only, I'm sure there was many other things that you learned from that process.
Well, she was also a fanatic about apostrophes. When we were laying out the book, she said, you have to go through the book and we have to check all the apostrophes because some are not facing in the right direction. And so she worked with the formatter to make sure that every apostrophe was facing in the proper direction. And she also checked on distances in locations that were in the book and said, this one's not going to work. Why don't we change it to this place in Colorado when they're working, so that it makes more sense geographically. So she was right on everything that she changed. And quite often she would change something and I would say, no, I don't want to do that. And she'd explain to me exactly why, and we'd argue about it for a while. And then I'd realize she was right and I would change it. She was really good. And one of the reasons why she was the right editor for me is because she had grown up in a show business family. Her father was a director on TV shows, and she had been in a background singer in a rock band when she was young. So she knew the milieu I was working with. She was of a similar age and a similar experience in terms of the fields that she had worked in. So she was the perfect person to be my editor.
See, I think that's something we can all take away from this today, is to find that right editor. You can't just, give it to somebody random on a website and be like, edit my book. You have to make sure that it's somebody who understands your vision, understands you, your experiences, and of course has the industry knowledge, like those apostrophes and the little details like that. I've worked with some amazing editors myself, people who, at first I was like, what does it matter what this person's hair color was? And, then she's like, well, everybody in their book is blonde, they all need, not everybody looks the same, for example, but I see exactly what you mean. So it's great that you had that editor on your side.
Or even having too many characters whose names start with the same letter.
Yeah, little details that you just don't realize, just like that. Yeah. Branching off of this, you have a couple other books, just to touch briefly on them. They're right behind you too. So Lenswoman in Love is the most recent and really cool. And one last question about that before we transition. Why fiction? Why not just, make it yourself in the book? And why create these characters?
Because it gave me freedom to invent. It gave me freedom to use my imagination. Right. It gave me the freedom to add a little wish fulfillment. Maddie is my alter ego, and most of her experiences were my experiences. But she got to do a few things I didn't get to do. She got to photograph Bob Dylan, who I never got to photograph. And all the places she went are places that I actually went. But it was getting to put it in a romance format, making it a love story, gave me structure. And sometimes with a memoir, it's difficult to find what the structure is. And even a memoir has to have an arc and has to have structure. And so by working with romance tropes, it gave me structure. And basically my trope is reuniting with first love, the second chance at love. Because in the beginning of the book, she falls hard for the hero, and he gives her first kiss and realizes because she's too young that it's too soon, and so he leaves and breaks her heart. And so it isn't until she has really become a complete person who has a career, who has had a lot of experiences, and finally works together with him on a feature film where he's directing and she's the still photographer, that they finally are ready for each other and have their second chance.
I love that. And that's a perfect way to frame it. There's so many tropes out there. I've written romance myself too for my clients. And, sometimes you want to make a trope work and it just doesn't make sense. But this is one that's perfect for you, because being that it's a memoir, it gives you the opportunity to share all these experiences, and she's able to go through everything you did, but it makes sense because the main idea is she's eventually going to find her way back to that love. It allows you a lot of freedom and wiggle room. I see that.
And in the meantime, the experiences that she has are true experiences. They have weight because they're based in truth.
Exactly.
What it's like to work on a movie set or a TV set, what it's like to be in a recording studio with musicians, what it's like to travel to places like Pakistan and Jamaica and London. And so it has veracity, even though it's fiction.
Yeah, it's truly incredible. So while we still have a little bit of time left today, I would love to, if you want to share a brief anecdote about these other two books that are right behind you here. You spoke briefly of them in your slideshow, but I think we're all kind of curious about what else you have in store here.
Well, the books have been out now for a decade, and they're still selling, which is wonderful. I'm still getting royalties.
That's great.
And I wanted to do a third photo book, which would basically be covering the kinds of things that Maddie shot in the 60s and 70s before I shot the Bob Marley and the John Carpenter book. But my publisher, Titan in the UK, specializes in genre. They mostly publish books that deal with the art direction of a science fiction movie, that kind of thing. And so they took a chance with the Bob Marley book because they knew he had such a huge following. And the John Carpenter book was right in their wheelhouse. But, pictures of the counterculture in the 60s and 70s, that was just too hard for them to deal with. So I haven't done that book yet, although it would be a perfect companion piece to Lenswoman in Love. But
I don't see why not, give it a shot.
But during the pandemic, I wrote another novel, which was inspired by a trip I took to Florence in October of 2019, just before the pandemic hit. And I was in Florence for 2 weeks, and I fell in love with that city. I fell in love with Botticelli and with the early Renaissance and with the Medici. And when I got home, I sat down and started to write. And I spent the entire pandemic in the late 15th century with characters dictating to me. And it was the most joyful experience. And it turned into a book that's called Caterina by Moonlight. And it is a Renaissance epic about a girl growing up during the early Renaissance and the transition from the ecclesiastical, the rigid mindset of the Middle Ages to the humanism of the Renaissance through the one person, because she's raised in a convent and then is exposed to the Medicis and that world and models for Botticelli and has a love affair with the younger Medici brother. It's a sumptuous novel, and it was so much fun writing it because all I had to do was take dictation.
I love that. And, first off, really cool that you're able to draw upon your past experiences and, that trip you took that inspired you so much to write a whole book from it. So really amazing. And to anybody listening, if you're stuck with ideas, maybe that's one thing you can do. Get out, travel, even if it's to your local park, not, Florence.
Well, I'm living proof that it's never too late to reinvent yourself and become a writer. If it's something you've always wanted to do, sit down and do it. Don't worry about how good the first draft is, because the first draft is generally referred to as the vomit draft. It's just where you get everything out onto paper so you have something to work with. And find a writer's critique group and go through it and refine it and take it deeper and make it better. And it's a very satisfying experience. And it's a learning curve. I took so many classes in, online. There's so many available to teach you about plot structure and character development and all of those things. So there's a lot to learn, but it's very satisfying. And it's certainly gratifying once the book is done.
Definitely, definitely. I love those last little tips that you shared with our audience just there. So that's a lot that we can take in and implement ourselves when we're writing next in our own domains. Kim, I'm wondering, you gave us some awesome links in that presentation telling us where we can find you, where we can look up these books, how we can get in touch, how we can stay connected.
Well, Lenswoman in Love is available through every place where you can buy books. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Barnes & Noble, you can get it through bookshop.org, which is great because it supports local bookstores. You can order it through any bookstore. You can find me on Facebook. Each of my books has its own Facebook page. I have a website, both an author website and a photographer's website. My photography website is lenswoman.com, and my author website is kimgottliebwalker.com, or katarinabymoonlight.com, or therenaissancewoman.net.
You sure have a lot.
Yes, all of those will take you to the same website.
There we go. Well, we're going to put those links in the description, like I said before, so that everybody can take a look and get in touch and stay up to date. This is some really incredible stuff, Kim. I absolutely love this. It was the first time somebody shared a PowerPoint on my show, and I loved it because we could see in real time everything you did, and it really put Lenswoman in Love in perspective. What better way to promote a book than by seeing the actual photos that it was inspired by? So thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me too.
Of course. And, to everybody listening today, I want to remind you that, again, check out the book, explore Kim's photography as well, and just take this to heart, everybody. Kim's story embodies exactly what we aim to showcase here on Authors on Mission: the power of your experiences, reinventation, using creative passion to build success across so many different domains. The way that you've translated your visual storytelling skills, Kim, into the written page really does show us some valuable insights for navigating their own creative paths. So again, it's been a pleasure. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Authors on Mission podcast, where we continue to bring you conversations with remarkable experts, inspire us to pursue our own missions with passion and purpose. Until next time, keep writing, keep creating, and keep pursuing your mission. See you next time, everybody.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.